The Toonami block really was one of the most impactful programming blocks for most American millennials. The legwork that it and Adult Swim did to expose a vast amount of American kids to anime is hard to accurately measure, but without it, I would have never seen Dragon Ball Z, Fooly Cooly, Bo 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 Bo, Yu Yu Hakusho, and our topic for today, Zoids Chaotic Century.
Zoids is a fascinating series that has a few different anime adaptations, all of which are barely related to each other in any way, shape, or form outside of the titular Zoids, these big animal-like mechas that go on crazy different adventures. Now those adventures could be something straightforward like a tournament arc that you'll see in Zoids New Century, which features this little white liger here, or they could be something far more complex, like what you get in Zoids Chaotic Century. Now you may be asking yourself, what is a Zoid and why am I listening to you talk about them? Well, second question first is because you're about to learn about some really good anime, so like, comment, subscribe, be sure to get yourself ready for more videos similar to this where I talk about some wonderful anime. But specifically, I want to talk about Zoids Chaotic Century because this show came at a real inflection point for the industry and helps set the foundation of some of the industry's biggest changes and some incredibly promising developments, while also being a surprisingly deep, action-packed mecha anime that I've been waiting for a very, very long time to rave about. As to what Zoids even are, it's a brand of model kit mecha toys from Japan that feature a number of designs like big dinosaurs, scorpions, foxes, ligers, and many, 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 many more. In universe, our story takes place on the planet Z, which is the home of this race of organic mecha creatures named Zoids, who are a type of metallic creature that are living beings, but they also have cockpits inside of them designed for humanoid use. They remind me a lot of Transformers, who are also living metal creatures, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on the face of it, but don't worry about all that, we're gonna expand on it later. Anyway, there's a boy named Van Flyheight who dreams of being an accomplished Zoid pilot, and at the start of our story, he's chased into some ruins by a group of bandits. There he discovers a weird pod that contains a dinosaur-like Zoid that looks and acts different than any Zoid he's ever seen before.
Together they try to escape the bandits, running past a ruined shield liger Zoid left rusting in the desert. This weird Zoid that Van names Zeke then fuses with the ruined shield liger, bringing it back to life, awakening a Zoid that Van is able to use to scare off the bandits. He later also awakens a strange girl named Fiona, who was in the pod beside Zeke, and together they go out into the world to discover who Zeke and Fiona really are and why they were sealed away in these pods. Along the way they make new friends like Irvine the mercenary slash thief who has his eyes set on Zeke, and my personal favorite, Moonbay the transporter, who has the most beautiful singing voice.
I am a transporter of the wasteland.
They then kinda sorta get involved in an ongoing war between the Helic Republic and the Gylos Empire.
Now, Van and Fiona's story is not one that I would call wholly unique. It lines up with many shonen character couples. You have the hot-headed protagonist, the sweet and intelligent, kind female friend, but they really do grow together and develop a lot over the series. You see Van grow into a talented Zoid pilot, while Fiona herself matures past her comedic and ditzy traits that she has at the start to an intelligent researcher, analyst, and her own kind of badass. No matter how many times you see these type of tropes in a story though, if the story is told well enough, then it really doesn't matter all that much in the end, right? There is war, political intrigue. The story doesn't really hold back on the effects of conflict that are really often ignored in shows meant for Western audience children especially. It touches on military factionalism and does its best to show both sides of the war fairly. You have courageous soldiers on both ends, as well as showing how many soldiers abuse their power and become no better than common bandits. While this is definitely closer to a Saturday morning cartoon than anything else, people do die in this series, and that may seem basic, but it's important. Wars have consequences. In my Small Soldiers video, I'd mentioned how a lot of media desensitizes us to those kind of consequences of conflict, and while there is little explicit death in Chaotic Century, especially the edit shown in America, it does occur, and these always feel like there's more something at stake there. Death is real. And that's way more than you would get from your standard Saturday morning cartoons.
The character design is really eye-catching as well, with diverse outfits and looks that really help them stick in the mind. Like how Irvine has this really cool eye patch that he uses as a scope, helping aid his work as a mercenary. Personally, I also love how many of the major characters from the Gylos Empire have a purple aesthetic to them. Now, members of the military, of course, all have similar uniforms, so that makes sense, but Raven, a talented Zoid pilot who doesn't really operate as a member of the military, also has this dark purple look to his jumpsuit. Or the Crown Prince Prince Rudolph, who almost always has clothes with shades of purple on it, whether he's in his office, robes or not. And while they'll have outfits that show off a lot of midriff, this isn't exclusive to just the ladies. These outfits are over the top but effective. Like if you take one look at Prozen, I think it should be clear that this dude's up to no good. There's also something about Van's initial design, this large tunic that's very visibly stitched together. It speaks to his scrappy nature and more humble upbringing. Also, I love how Van's shoulder pads here feel reminiscent of the design of Helic Republic soldiers, which is likely a reference to Van's idolization of his dad, who was a talented Zoid pilot and soldier who died defending their home. There's also preconditions the audience to trust the Helic Republic soldiers a bit more, as they share some of the design traits to our hero. It's shown throughout the series that Van doesn't really have a whole lot of interest in being in the military, but he's always wanted to be like his dad, so I could totally see him trying to look more like him. One of the most notable choices is how a lot of characters have these distinctive marks on their face for some reason. It looks really cool, and it didn't really matter if I got a real explanation, but after doing some research, I did actually find that Michihiro Uema, the mangaka for the Zoids manga adaptation, did give their own explanation for their markings. When one reader asked, "What are the patterns on the characters' faces?" they responded with, "Originally, these occurred when metal molecules inside of the bodies of people from planet Z rose to the surface of their bodies. But some people also tattoo them as symbols to represent their status or the fact that they are members of the same clan."
Now, is this explanation canon? I don't know, and I'm not gonna purport to say, but I feel like it's the best we're really gonna get. And then there's the actual Zoid designs, and there's so many kinds of Zoid designs. You got the Ligers like this one, you got giant gorillas, giant rhinos, massive ass brontosaurus looking Zoids, or Moonbay's Gustav, which is like a transporter bug looking guy. While researching, I actually found this toy and it looks so gosh damn adorable. I love this little chibi Gustav they have here. And I want it a lot, but if you look at Moonbay and Fiona on the little side here, they look rough, and I don't like how they did McQueen like that, to be real. Now in the show itself, these Zoids were animated using 3D models, and for late 90s TV series animation, this is some stellar CG work.
While it definitely doesn't blend in perfectly, even modern anime struggles with that. These cel-shaded models get the job done and give the series a very unique look. The 2D animation is pretty good in my opinion for a 90s anime. There's not a lot of complex movement in 2D, mainly characters are talking or interacting with each other or cuts of them talking while piloting. But the colors are beautiful, the character designs are unique, and overall, it just has a really solid look to it. I do have gripes about the look of the show, mainly with the lack of variety in battle locations. Planet Z isn't all desert. The gang regularly travels through forests or goes through mountains, but it feels like 90% of the time, all battles in this show end up taking place in this barren wasteland. Far from visually stimulating, especially over the course of 60+ episodes. This does improve in Season 2 with more variety in locations and an exploration into the world itself. They actually have a fight in a forest! Now it should be fair in saying that this initial lack of variety was likely due to cost cutting, as the fights all featured the previously mentioned cel-shaded 3D animated Zoids. Also, key point is that the CG really pops more against the tans and browns of the desert as well. It gives it a nice contrast against the metallic Zoids.
Focusing in specifically on the 3D animation a bit more, Zoids Chaotic Century was made back in 1999, and the people at Studio Xebec really outdid themselves with this. For its time, there is some incredible work being done here, and I think it holds up fairly well to today. CG is fairly limited to just the Zoids itself as well, which I think helps give the Zoids a bit of a distinct, otherworldly feel. They feel different, they feel alien in their own ways, while not being too janky that they become a whole eyesore. Chaotic Century is also notable because working on the CG animation is Eiji Inamoto in his very first work on an anime production. Now you may be asking who's that, but Eiji Inamoto is the founder of Studio Orange, which is on the cutting edge of CG in anime.
Known for their all-CG anime adaptations in Land of the Lustrous, Beastars, and the stunning Trigun Stampede, Orange shows the potential of what could be when blending anime sensibilities with CG animation. Trigun Stampede being the best example in my opinion, as it is both their most recent project at time of recording, and really exaggerates the movements of its goofy protagonist Vash the Stampede.
Could go on and on about this adaptation that too few have really given a chance, closing off their minds to a whole form of animation just because it's different. As a noted Berserk fan, I am all too familiar with the trials and tribulations of bad CG anime, but it's a tool, and Trigun Stampede shows that in the right hands, which Orange has the best hands, you can make top-of-the-line, exciting, memorable action. And with that tool, in a post-Spider-Verse and Arcane world, I think that's becoming more and more accepted. But the reaction to Trigun shows that we still have a long way to go, especially in the anime scene. We're gonna come back to all that later, but for now I want to get back to talking about this show and what exactly happened in Zoids Chaotic Century that really made it stick with me. Now, this isn't gonna be the most detailed plot summary you can get, but I at least want to give you the broad strokes of the story.
As I mentioned before, we have our lead Van, Flyhide, and at the start of the series we see Van's hometown, which is called the Wind Colony. When he first meets Fiona, Zeke, and gets his shield liker, Van decides to leave his home for two reasons. Firstly, the bandits are searching for Zeke, who is an organoid, a rare type of Zoid that helps to enhance a Zoid's capabilities. The second is that Fiona doesn't actually have any memories of her past, so Van wants to help her try to regain her memories and figure out why she was in a pod. The only clue they have is something called Zoid Eve and Fiona's strange connection to the ruins of the ancient Zoidians, which are an ancient society of people who inhabited planet Z a long time ago. As I mentioned before, they then meet Moonbay and Irvine and get involved in the ongoing war between the Helic Republic, which has a capital that looks like the White House, and the Guileless Empire that is more like the Ottoman Empire. The palace looks like the Hagia Sophia, which is a mosque, not a palace, but it's a really cool design choice. Partway into the season, the elderly emperor passes away of natural causes, leaving his grandson Rudolph as the only remaining heir to the Guileless Empire. But due to Rudolph's age, he leaves Gunther Prozin, who we're just going to refer to as Prozin, because that is a sick name, as the regent who will rule until Rudolph is old enough to assume the throne himself. Here, the Guileless Empire becomes even more like the Ottoman Empire in a way that you can never really trust the Grand Vizier.
So yeah, it turns out you really shouldn't trust an ambitious young man with the throne and somehow expect them to give up their absolute power over a massive empire to a small child. It turns out that really doesn't go all that well, actually. Predictably, Prozin tries to have Rudolph assassinated, wanting to pin the assassination on the Helic Republic to justify further war with them so he can take their territory.
It fails though, and Rudolph ends up with Van and the gang, who are going on a quest to get him back home and to some people who can actually assist him in taking back the throne. Along the way though, they find out that Prozin has become obsessed with the ancient Zoidians, specifically an ancient superweapon called the Death Saurer. It's like a giant T-Rex Zoid with a giant fucking laser that totally wipes out anything it touches. It's pretty metal, like I challenge you to come up with a more ridiculous and yet perfect big boss character. The gang has to try and stop Prozin from awakening the Death Saurer before it's too late. Van and the gang constantly having to fight Imperial soldiers, mercenaries, and one really edgy teenager named Raven, who has their own black organoid with cool dragon-like wings. Raven is a constant antagonist throughout the series and is a pretty interesting take on a rival character. They are always comparing themselves to and looking to fight against Van, as they are both young, talented pilots who use organoids and have polar opposite views on the world. Van loves Zoids with all of his heart, always has and always will, while Raven has had a lifelong hatred of all Zoids and delights in destroying them whenever he can. There's a lot to unpack about this rivalry, but put a pin in that, we're going to come back to that later, I promise. This season caps off with the whole gang teaming up with friends in the Helic Republic and allies they found in the Guileless Empire to take down Prozin and restore peace to the land. They of course succeed, and everyone gets together afterwards for Rudolph's grand coronation and to also celebrate that they've saved the whole world from Prozin's superweapon. Except for Van and Fiona, who just aren't about that scene, instead riding off into the sunset to try to find Zoid Eve.
Personally, in my rewatch, I found this a little bit underwhelming, to be honest. While the culmination of Van and all of his friends joining together to save the world is a classic adventure story payoff, it unfortunately makes the Death Star look a bit weak and silly.
This has been hyped up as a super weapon all season, the Zoid that single-handedly annihilated the entire ancient Zoidian civilization at the time because of its awesome power. They do a decent job of showing off that power at first, with its attacks just melting enemy Zoids into nothing. But the episode it first appears in is also the episode it is defeated. Even if everyone was working together to defeat it, it felt like more time was needed to let it show off what it can do. Now, I'm not saying that the story doesn't give a decent justification for its defeat. They block its intake van, which delays its big attack just enough for Van to get enough time in to attack its weak point. And like as a concept for how a fight would end, that's fine. My complaint is more so the impact of such a world-ending threat being dealt with right away just removes a lot of tension the story could have had. This is a minor gripe overall. I think the season is generally really strong, just a point that I wish could have been improved. Also, it's crazy that Prozin is just standing on its shoulder like this, like being unarmored while two full militaries are attacking your super weapon it's just a dumb move. I get that the Death Star is its own entity and it has no need for a pilot. It's just a girl boss Zoid bent on destruction, and I respect that. But like, why is he here? It's so silly. Again, minor gripe, just want to point it out.
Getting back on track here, this season was why Zoids is the most impactful mecha anime of my young life. From its memorable character designs, captivating action, and complex plots for a kid's anime, there really was a lot going on here. This is one of those series that was both simple enough to follow episode to episode, but also maintained an ongoing plot about war, coups, and betrayal well before Avatar: The Last Airbender. Also, I'm dead serious about this being the most impactful mecha anime of my life. I know that most people around this point in time were usually into Gundam Wing or Zoids New Century, where this thing is from, but those shows didn't really speak to me, and I only saw bits and pieces of New Century, and it all felt pretty episodic. Gundam Wing, I remember a couple episodes pretty clearly for some reason, but I didn't really have the ability to stick with it. I kind of just fell in and out of it, didn't really follow the whole series all the way through. Others will talk about a show like Visions of Escaflowne, and while that's genuinely an incredible series, I didn't have the chance to watch that on TV as a kid, so I can't count it, unfortunately. Now, regardless of the quality, none of these series could ever come close to the chokehold Zoids Chaotic Century had on me.
Watching the series back after all these years, I can say that even with all of its complexities, this is still closer to a Saturday morning cartoon than anything else. But I was impressed by how seemingly standalone episodes would actually turn out to have major plot implications further down the line. Like in one episode, the gang helps a kooky old man named Dr. D build a weather machine. It turns out that old man is a super important scientist that gets the gang out of trouble over and over again, especially in season 2. There's a lot of time spent building up the backstories of the crew, understanding what makes them tick and how they get to where they are now. Like how Irvine's tough childhood led to him being more closed off to the world, keeping most people at arm's length and finding work as a thief and a scoundrel. Or how Moonbay just can't seem to pull herself away from life on the road, even if she could live the luxurious life that she regularly claims she desires. When confronted with opportunities to make it a reality, she chooses to live in the Gustav with her friends.
Van's progression as well actually really surprised me. Now, a shonen protagonist character being a hot-headed and reckless jerk is nothing really new, but watching it back, I was pleasantly surprised by how natural it felt to see Van go from a kid with no experience fighting with Zoids whatsoever to him beating experienced and talented Zoid pilots. Earlier on, I mentioned that Zeke is an organoid, a rare type of Zoid that enhances another Zoid's capabilities. Now, Zoids can naturally heal. They are, again, living metal creatures, but Zeke can speed up that healing and make them faster and stronger and built to last longer, just like Duracell. But that's how Van is able to keep up with people way beyond his skill level. Now, sure, he also does have some natural talents. He's not completely helpless, but Zeke is there to keep him competitive with his other foes that normally will be way beyond a rookie like him. This immediately makes it clear that while Van is strong, he's far from perfect, and there's a moment in the mid-season finale that I think really shows this perfectly. So there's a recurring Helic Republic officer named Rob Herman, and Van needs to take him on a really important mission to go and save the Republic.
Along the way, they run into Raven, who has beaten Van every single time so far, barely even using his organoid to do so. When they fight this time though, Rob, who's actually a well-trained pilot, coaches Van on better tactics and how to fight. With that advice and coaching, he's actually able to beat Raven and finally save the day. This is how they show you that at the end of the day, Van's skills are raw and unrefined, but he is incredibly skilled. Even with a little instruction and training, he has great potential. And unlike in many other shonen anime, this is made all the more impactful here because this comes halfway through the first season. We had time to watch Van fight, win, and lose, see what he can do on his own, see the way that he perseveres no matter what.
So I don't want to be deceptive here. The show has a whole lot of contrivances, and flat comedy, and unnecessary action beats, and some eye-rolling dialogue. Also, yes, this is entirely based off the English dub. It's the version I watched as a kid, so it's the version I'm going to be covering now. Cry about it if you don't like that, but if you've seen my Yu-Gi-Oh! GX video, you'll understand that I have a soft spot for these older dubs. They have an undeniable charm to them, in my personal opinion, and I love talking about them. The thought and care that went into creating actual arcs, though, for our characters set it above most other shows where characters like Yugi Moto or Ash Ketchum didn't really have much issue dominating their opponents. Now sure, Ash did lose every now and again, and Yugi just outright cheated.
Turtle, catapult launch my dragon champion!
Your worthless attack simply knocked its flotation ring off!
Doesn't it seem strange to you that a castle that's lost its flotation ring is somehow still floating?
Run, monsters! Get out of the way!
It's no good. The Chaos Shield is keeping them from running anywhere. You've trapped them all inside.
That's just not how the game works. Like, that's just not how Duel Monsters works. I get it. I get it. They didn't formalize rules until later on in the manga, so it was just kind of like whatever goes. But Yugi just cheats. Like, if you're a kid at the time playing the Yu-Gi-Oh card game, you'll watch what Yugi does on screen. He's just cheating. That's all he's doing. It's insane. Van, on the other hand, felt like he naturally was growing and adapting as he won, lost, and met new people along his journeys. Which leads us perfectly to the next stage of his adventures in Zoids Chaotic Century Season 2. But before all that, a quick word from our advertisers here. Me. So if you didn't know, I actually have my own line of merch that I've been working on with a few of my artist friends. There's a few designs here by Tiny Ghost and Yog KV. This one's by Yog KV and this one's also by Yog KV. Now, these shirts are something that I am very proud of because I worked with these with my artists collaboratively. I basically went to them and was like, hey, I love your art and these are the type of motifs and design choices that I like about your art. And together we were able to bring out something that, represented their art style, but also, represented something that I think matches the channel's vibe and the vibe I want to give off, at least. I actually get a lot of compliments wearing these shirts out in public. People are like, oh, I just love your shirt. And I'm like, thank you. So if you want anything like this, there's gonna be a link for that down below. It really helps support the channel when you do, purchase things like this. And in return, you get these really cool shirts. So be sure to check that out. There's also Cold Heart merch that has my logo on it here, which is designed by regular channel artist Zaruna. We also have a hoodie though. Got that hoodie right here. Now, I'm not typically a hoodie person, but I really like this hoodie. It's very, very comfortable. I basically wear it all the time. I'm actually really looking forward to it getting cold again so I can start wearing it again. If you want that again, in the description down below, there is going to be a link for all of that here. Thank you for bearing with the advertisement here, but let's get you right back to talking about Zoids Season 2, Guardian Force.
Hey, are you okay? Stay away from me!
Season 2 opens up with Van 2 years after saving Rudolph. He surprisingly joined the Hellenic Republic military, training under the experienced Colonel Kruger. Kruger was a reoccurring character last season that I didn't really touch on, but he's one of the top leaders in the military who was revealed to actually be a former friend with Van's father, Dan. Dan Flyheight. I wouldn't have personally picked that for a name, but sure, we'll go with Dan. Oh, Dandy Dan. So as a way to honor his friend's memory, Kruger takes Van under his wing and we see that he's become a skilled pilot in his own right, no longer relying purely on Zeke to skirt by. Van is shown at the end of his training able to beat every training exercise that they can throw at him, while Fiona is off traveling with Dr. D looking for any evidence of Zoid Eve or ways to learn about her past. But no matter what ruins or ancient texts are found, they're always mysteriously stolen or go missing before Fiona and the Doctor get a chance to look at them. Once Van completes his training, he heads home to the Wind Colony and runs into a strange man named Hiltz, who has a red organoid called Ambient. Shortly after meeting him, the village is attacked by a bandit and a stealth viper, which is a snake with cloaking on it, so that it's all stealthy and sneaky. Personally, I would have called it a sneaky snake. When Van goes off to stop the attack, he reunites with Fiona, whose convoy was nearby and was also being attacked by the Viper. Together, they defeat the stealth Viper, the sneaky snake, who, surprise, surprise, was sent by Hiltz in secret, because this is our secret bad guy of the season. In the 2 years that have gone by between seasons, the Gylos Empire and Hellenic Republic have maintained peace between the nations, but since the end of hostilities, there's been a rise in bandits, mercenaries, and rogue officers looking to enrich themselves in the border area between the Gylos Empire and the Hellenic Republic. As more chaos erupts in both the Empire and the Republic, stoked on in the shadows by Hiltz, the two nations decide to make a joint operation task force called the Guardian Force.
Boom, bang, title of the season. Technically, Season 1 and Season 2 individually are Zoids Chaotic Century and Zoids Guardian Force, respectively. Which is an anime trend I just really think makes everything unnecessarily confusing. Video games and movies do this as well. Like, why call something Terminator 4 when you can call it Terminator Salvation? And then don't even get me started on the Fate series, and that's just Okay, cut all that. We're not talking about the Fate series today. I don't have time for that. You don't have time for that. Let's just move on.
So season 2 mainly centers on Van and the gang going around as the Guardian Force, both trying to figure out what Hiltz and his companion Reese are up to, while also fighting against some of the lawlessness and corruption around the more rural areas of the countries. Interestingly enough, you get some recurring villains from season 1, like this group of Imperial soldiers that decided to threaten a whole town providing them protection money and tribute, or else they're just gonna blow up the whole town. It's a nice display of how even though the war is over, the border areas especially need time to recover, and soldiers without any enemy to fight can easily turn into petty warlords. The subject isn't delved into that deeply, and there is some light mind control going on here, but it's nice to see the show actually include details like this. I think it's a nice touch.
Again, this anime was made to promote a toy line, and I love how much effort went into crafting a real world and story. It reminds me of a similar anime around this time, also based on a toy series called Digimon. Now, to be honest, as a kid, I never really saw that many toys for either series. Maybe some action figures for Digimon, but not like a whole lot, and not the actual real core product that the anime was trying to promote. Someday I'd love to do a deep dive on Digimon, but for right now, let's talk about the history of Zoids. But why just tell you about it when I can show you it as well? Now, I picked this bad boy up on my trip to Japan back in 2019, saving it for just this video. Yes, that is how long I've been procrastinating this video, just drop it, okay? I will work better at getting things done quickly next time, don't worry. Now, originally I chose this ox purely because I'm a tourist, and I thought that it would just be cool to build this one. It looks pretty neat, right? Then on rewatch, I discovered that this Zoid actually is featured heavily in season 2 as the primary Zoid of fans' new companion, Thomas Shoebolts. Personally, I find Thomas to be pretty annoying, but hey, the Zoid is cool, and we're just gonna build it already, all right? So I actually had never built any model kits until like mid-2024. I did that on stream. I built this little guy right here, which I think is pretty neat. It's pretty fun, relaxing, and I've been looking forward to actually putting this together for a very long time, especially now that I've actually tried model kits. Let's get that out here. Hell yeah. I know Zoid model kits are a little bit different than, you know, Gundam model kits. They're by completely different companies, but I'm excited to actually dig into it, see what we got going on here. Now, as you may know, model kits like this are super popular in Japan. It has a really dedicated hobby base. Now, the granddaddy of all of it, of course, is the Gundam series, the toys brought to the world by Bandai back in 1980, while Zoids was crafted by rival company Takara Tomy and released in 1983, though it took a bit of time for it to find its footing, starting off with these freaky little wind-up toy looking guys and slowly changing over to the kind of kits you see before me. So let's just dig into this and see what it's like. Here, I'm gonna get a little camera set up we're gonna work on here. Get you a little close-up view. Gonna put my glasses on for this part just so I can see everything. Also, there's a pole in the middle here, but you should be able to see on the other screen, like my hands and what I'm doing here. This is interesting. A lot more big pieces. Usually in the Gundam kits I build, they're all like in a bunch of little pop-out things. You use these kind of kits to snip out here. Looks like it's a little more formulated than that. Okay, let's get all this out and then little bodies here already made. It's all camo, that's nice. Okay. It's interesting how there's like a base of stuff here, like that you build onto, like, oh, it has a little like rider guy in like a little prone position. It's so strange looking. But this is really cool. All right, so this doesn't seem super hard, but I'm gonna keep building this, but let's get back to talking about season 2. Now, we get the basic premise, Van and the gang going along the border regions trying to stop the chaos being instigated by Hiltz and his crew. It's pretty straightforward, easy to understand, but it does make a good chunk of the season feel very villain of the week without a significant story thread to really drive the season forward.
That is until later in the season when they reintroduce Raven, who's kind of lost their entire damn mind. Now, Raven has always had this pure hatred of Zoids from the minute he was introduced, but this season that's taken up a notch by him just destroying every Zoid in sight. His reintroduction also reintroduces the main storyline, and woo-hoo, everyone does love an overarching plot now, don't they? Though most of that plot consists of Hiltz and Reese manipulating Raven in a bunch of different ways, while also building another superweapon. Ever since Star Wars, it's always been in vogue to have some form of superweapon to be the main threat, and really, that remains true to this day. I mean, Star Wars itself has done it, what, like 4 times? So, this time we have the Death Stinger, which is like the Death Star, but a scorpion. And also, it doesn't have a giant intake van that you can clog to kill it. So unlike the Death Star, the Death Stinger defeats our heroes, and for a few episodes, you have them running from the Death Stinger as it uses its giant cannon to destroy a number of major cities. This is a real major threat. Okay, that's enough building for now. We got the basic structure done. We'll add the armor onto it later, but let's get right back to us here. So if we go back, this actually addresses my issue with the finale of season 1, because there are multiple episodes and multiple fights with the Death Stinger that show how powerful this thing is, and it makes it incredibly clear how difficult it is for our heroes to overcome such a massive threat. After seeing Van and the gang lose to it over and over, you start thinking, how on earth can they even defeat this thing? And well, they kind of really don't truly ever beat it, but that's skipping ahead a bit. In the meantime, to aid their escape, the gang all rides in the mega massive Zoid Ultrasaurus, the largest Zoid ever made, proudly piloted by Moonbay. Now, I love this thing. It's just a massive moving base, kind of like an aircraft carrier, but it looks like a Brontosaurus. And that's the kind of nonsense that I love in this series. Also, its theme song is literally the most obvious knockoff of the Jurassic Park song that plays when they originally see the Brontosaurus in the movie. It's beautiful. I low-key love when anime rips off Western music. I think it's funny. Now, the gang is eventually able to take down the Death Stinger. Kind of. It's temporary. It turns into light as Hiltz is talking about resurrecting the mythic Zoid Eve and how they are all puny humans, implying that he is something else entirely. As the Death Stinger and Hiltz disappear, so does Fiona, his energy transporting them away to a very cinematic and dramatic cave. There she sees an unconscious Raven and Reese, the blue-haired baddie that decided to defect with Raven when they just weren't vibing with Hiltz's mysterious but certainly evil goals any longer. But there's also the evil Lord Prozin back again. But this time his body's fused in part with the core of the Death Soarer that he made, and he's just a slab now. This seems like a miserable life. This begins the explanation of Fiona's past, starting with how her actual name is Alicia Lynette, and that she, Hiltz, and Reese are all actually ancient Zoidians, the original inhabitants of this planet. You see, fun fact, it's mentioned briefly in Raven's backstory, but most people on the planet are actually the descendants of humans from Earth who found their way to this planet and just kind of took it over. With stories of the homeland talked about a bit, but it seems mostly forgotten. And I like that a lot. I think there's a lot of little things they do with the history of the world that I really respect. It actually reminds me a lot of the story of Trigun, but with mecha creatures instead of whatever you consider Vash the Stampede. The point is that they finally answer the question of what Zoid Eve actually is. It's this big statue of a naked woman who is the Eve to all Zoids, which is to say that the cores to all Zoids are made by the Zoid Eve, and a Zoid core is like the Zoid's heart and soul. And when Zoid Eve was active, Zoids used to be more frequent and more wild. But when the ancient Zoidians created the original Death Star and it decimated almost all of their civilization, the remaining Zoidians decided to seal away the Zoid Eve to weaken the Death Star down so that they could actually seal that away as well. This had a knock-on effect of actually weakening all Zoids, dumbing them down and removing a lot of their wild nature. Something that always confused me as a kid is what Zoids actually are, because they have their own hearts, their cores, and are shown to sometimes operate from their own volition, but for the most part they're treated like robot mechas that just kind of look like animals. But this explanation actually clears that up, where the Zoids we've seen throughout the series are Zoids after the decline of the civilization that birthed them. simple-minded and less wild.
In fact, at the start of the series, it explicitly states there's almost no wild Zoids anymore, and the only ones you ever find are either ones abandoned, broken down, there's sleeper Zoids that are piloted by drones, runaways from the military, though that's never really shown in the anime. And to get ahead of anyone going, actually, Zoids developed and evolved like animals on Earth, or ancient Zoidians slowly cultivated and changed Zoids over time to make them more suitable to be used as beasts of burden. There are a few continuities in the Zoids franchise, and it's kind of messy, so this specifically is about how the anime portrays it going down, specifically the Chaotic Century anime. Now, if Zoid Eve were to be reactivated, then Zoids would start to be produced again, multiplying across the planet. Now, while that would be cool, the reason the Death Star was created in the first place was because these wild Zoids are giant metal beasts. Giant, deadly metal beasts that apparently have naturally occurring laser cannons, so they were pretty dangerous.
Wrong. The weapons on Zoids are not naturally occurring. They are designed and fitted onto the Zoids by humans. This hack YouTuber has an unarmored Zoid sitting right in front of him. That's just how they are, and them just being unarmored is enough chaos. They're giant, wild mechanical beasts. They're huge. Of course they're gonna cause problems whether they have weapons on them or not. But also, please don't ask how Van keeps having rockets and missiles to fire when he was a broke kid. And also how when the Shield Liger digivolved into the Blade Liger, it automatically gains swords with giant cannons attached to them. Don't ask about that. It happens, no big deal. Do not, it doesn't matter. Shut up.
The ancient Zoidians thought that the Death Star would solve all these issues by reining in these wild Zoids, but you know, it just went ahead and destroyed all of civilization instead, which is a big whoopsie daisy on that one. Just, my bad, egg on my face. Just happens, you know? Okay, let's get a little more work done on our little Zoid here, okay? There we go. Let's go back here to, we're on 17. Now we're putting some armor on here, okay. Got our guy looking like this. Okay, got their shoulder pads on. All right. Okay, there we go. That's on there. Got the little armor pieces on. Good. Okay, look at that. Got our little ox made. Oh, look at him. That wasn't too hard. Most of this was just kind of clicking things into place, which is a lot more simplified than Gundam's, which is good. I mean, for kids, this is a pretty nice starter into model kits, I think. This was a lot of fun. I'm gonna try to get a battery in it so I can motorize it, but I like this. Look at him. He's hanging out here with me.
Getting back to Fiona's big decision, reactivating the Zoid Eve would lead to the Death Star and the Death Stinger fusing together and becoming even more powerful. So it would be a good idea to prevent that from happening at all costs. Fiona is forced by Prozin to open the gates to the Zoid Eve, which is in a valley that actually came up a few times in the show, the Valley of the Rare Hertz. It's a place known for having a specific frequency that drives Zoids feral, and there was an early episode all about the gang having to deal with that. But it comes back here because this valley is where the ancient Zoidian city of Eveopolis was hidden the entire time. It's a simple setup and payoff, but it's very satisfying to call back to explain why this was happening. It's a nice callback that also uses the Rare Hertz to cause more problems for the gang trying to save Fiona, as many Zoids can't even approach the area without going haywire. And it ties up loose ends to make the whole world feel full and thought out and explain why this whole phenomenon was even happening in the first place. Since Prozin has fused with the core of the Death Star, he wants the Zoid Eve to be reactivated so he can destroy the world. But they need Fiona to activate it. But she of course refuses and contemplates shutting the whole thing down, completely ending all Zoids. As she struggles with this very difficult choice, a random blast from a nearby fight hits next to the control panel and activates Zoid Eve anyways. Prozin is consumed by the core of the Death Star, and Hiltz fuses with the core of the Death Stinger, and then those cores both fuse together to become the new Death Star core, which is then controlled by Hiltz because Hiltz is actually an ancient Zoidian, while Prozin is then just left to be absorbed by the core. He doesn't actually get to have any control or really be a force in it anymore. Sucks to suck, Prozen. Hiltz then uses this device to send blasts of energy all over the world, leveling cities, wiping out armies, and killing untold amounts of people.
It's funny how in the English version of this show, they would cut out whenever there's a character that has a gun pointed directly at them or directly at the screen, or if there's any blood at all. You gotta cut that out, but if there's a total destruction of an entire city, you're totally fine because you don't see an actual person die. Censorship is incredibly silly.
Zeke and Fiona, seeing no other hope, try to destroy the Zoid Eve, but Van stops them with a brilliant plan, shooting himself and the Blade Liger out of the Ultrasaurus's giant cannons and hoping that he can just bust through the Death Sorcerer's armor. This plan is utterly ridiculous, but of course, it works and the day is saved.
The city of Evopolis descends back underground and our heroes all gather together to celebrate their victory. There's not a lot of mention of all the mass civilians killed, but hey, it's all played out to this sick guitar solo, so what do I really have to complain about?
We had finally done it. The ultimate Death Soarer was destroyed, and with it destructive individuals such as Hiltz and Prozen, who had been prepared to sacrifice everything in order to serve their own twisted desires.
Who am I kidding? I've got a few more in me. So the issue with most series ending like this is that I would really love at least one episode epilogue showing the world being rebuilt, or like a paths our heroes take now that the adventure is over. But I guess that's me being greedy. We do at least have a satisfying conclusion to the adventure itself, even if we don't really know what becomes of our heroes after everything. It's crazy how rare it feels for a series to go on like this for 67 full episodes and still actually have a narrative with a satisfying conclusion. It's not trying to do anything narratively complicated for the most part. Sure, it's a kid's show, where our heroes destroy multiple doomsday weapons to save the world. But it did its job, and that bare minimum is just so sadly rare, both in kids shows and especially just in anime in general.
Okay, so real quick, I put a battery in the Zoid, and it looks so cool walking around. Look at these cannons firing while it walks. Also, its mouth closes and opens, and I just love this. This is really neat to have as a kid's toy. I'm definitely getting this for my nephew.
Now, Zoids Chaotic Century also has a manga that I want to touch on a bit here, but to be upfront, I had no idea this manga existed before I started researching for this video. And so, of course, I read the entire thing. Now, you could call this a heroic task, Herculean, maybe, but in reality, it was officially about 29 chapters. We're going to get into some unofficial stuff in that in a bit as well, but to start off, this manga is pretty different than the anime.
There's a lot of the same characters like Van, Zeke, Fiona, Moonbay, and Irvine all included in there, but their backgrounds and characterizations are just a bit different. Since the starting point is Takara Tomy wanting to promote a toy line, it's hard to say where the creative origin point is for this series, but from what I can tell, the mangaka Michihiro Uema was the character designer for most of the main cast and set the basis for the story. But since the manga and anime ran at basically the same time, the details vary wildly. General character traits are very similar, though Fiona is much less goofy. Anime Fiona kinda acts like she was born yesterday with absolutely no memories or understanding of social norms, while the manga Fiona knows her name and doesn't really struggle all that much with fitting in with people. It feels like there's less in the manga for Fiona to really do, other than give some expedition dumps and teach Van about organoids. But there's also just less time in the manga to do a whole lot in general. It's pretty fast-paced and doesn't have a lot of goofing off time like the anime does.
My sister's getting married today.
The biggest changes are things like Zeke's power allowing Van to speak to and understand the feelings of the Zoids that Van and Zeke are piloting. Like in Van's first fight, he uses his dad's old command wolf and is told by the command wolf about a finishing move that will win the fight but also kill the Zoid, sacrificing themselves to protect their old partner's family, which it wants Van to do. This gives the Zoids a lot more personality and agency, and adds to the idea that Zoids aren't just machines, they aren't just mechas, but they're actually living creatures with their own souls. When Van gets the Shield Liger 2, it has a lot more depth to it. Instead of it being a wreck in the desert near his hometown that he's piloting by the end of the first episode, he takes a few chapters and finds it on his journey after he meets Moonbay. They learn that the Liger's name is Caesar, and his pilot was Moonbay's older brother Jadao, who's not in the anime at all. There's a whole plot device that Caesar is protecting, and I'm not going to get into the details of that, but Caesar has been protecting it since Jadao's death. Now, when Caesar's attacked by bandits trying to get this item and nearly killed, Zeke and Fiona use their ability to allow Van to speak to Caesar's heart and see the memory of Jadal in his final moments. Jadal's last words to Caesar were that his next pilot would be one who cries for Zoids, someone who values them as living creatures, which perfectly describes Van, because the core conflict in the manga does basically revolve around this idea of Zoids being living beings, which leads me to the biggest two changes of the manga.
Raven appears in the very first chapter, and like the anime, is an emo Zoid-hating dick. Van and Raven's directly opposed worldviews when it comes to Zoids takes front and center in any conflict between the two. Second major change is that instead of the anime, where there's basically a hot war going on from near the start, the Republic and Empire remain in a standoff here. The Empire threatening neutral cities or trying to provoke a response from the Republic to justify a full-on war. This means that most of the battles occur mainly through third parties, mercenaries hired by the Empire. They're set up for some more stuff to come in the future, but alas, the series never lasted that long. The ending is rushed with the threat of war, the death, sorrow, and Prosen all getting mentioned but never really getting explored. Instead, the series wraps up with the climactic fight of Van and Raven, where Van learns that Raven hates Zoids because one day, a Zoid went on a rampage and killed his entire family, except for his long-lost twin brother, but we don't really have time to get into that, so don't worry about that. In the anime, that's also the reason for Raven's hatred, but there that Zoid was actually Ambient, the red organoid that Hiltz owns, that Raven's parents were studying because they were scientists. The manga version is actually so much darker because a young Raven, whose actual name is Joyce, took some data and loaded it onto his family Zoid. But that data causes the Zoid to go haywire and lose control, which results in all of Raven's family dying as he watches helplessly from the cockpit of the Zoid. Like, he literally has to watch the Zoid that he fucked up kill his entire family. It's so dark. Van is able to break through to Raven that his family's death wasn't his fault, nor the fault of all Zoids. It was an accident that happened. There's no way any of them could have known that that would have occurred if he tried to load this data onto the Zoid. And with that breakthrough, they both emerge from Raven's Zoid with the hope of a brighter future. And while that ending does not tie up most plot threads, the mangaka was able to fit in the ending to the central conflict from the beginning of the series, with Raven and Van settling their differences.
Now, you may think that that's the end, but Michiru Uema wasn't done there. They went on to create a doujin of their own manga, continuing the series on for about 7 more chapters. You can really see their passion for the series, still wanting to complete the story that they had started. But after these 7, it ends with another cliffhanger, never to be continued again. The manga is interesting. You can definitely tell that there was a unique vision and a much bigger focus on how people and Zoids coexist on the planet Z. There's a few ancient Zoids like Windine, which is a giant Zoid from the port town of Porto that provides the energy to the city, or Oluga, which is a giant wall around the city of Mule that forms a barrier to keep them safe from the Empire. Which is why addressing Raven's hatred of Zoids became so central to the climax. There's a lot of interesting ideas, and if you're a fan of Zoids, I highly recommend checking this manga out. It's not better than the anime, but they're both trying to do very different things. And I really respect that. I really respect Uema's vision. Also, Uema actually had an original series get an anime this year called From Bureaucrat to Villainous, Dad's Been Reincarnated, which is actually a really hilarious villainous isekai anime where an older man is visited by Truck-kun and then wakes up as the villainous in a game that his daughter plays, that he has cursory knowledge of. It's actually a lot of fun, and I highly recommend checking it out. The second episode also has a whole joke about Zoids Chaotic Century, and I knew the mangaka was the creator of this series as well before I started watching the anime, but seeing such a blatant reference made me do the Leo meme.
I propose we use a design based on the popular anime Mechazoid Warrior Wyvern.
What? Can we even get permission for that?
I could not hide my excitement at this, but I was also at the time working on this video, so Zoids has been on my mind a lot lately, as you can hopefully tell. Real quick here, I do want to also shout out the Iron Bible for helping a lot in this research. It's a fan-made website that has done its best over the years to collect as much information as possible about the Zoids franchise, from its toy line storylines to its mini anime that's come after Chaotic Century. Its whole mission reminds me a lot of how back in the day, communities were overrun with misinformation, and it was so difficult to parse fan theories from canon, especially when so much content would be untranslated. This wasn't just an issue with anime though. Like nowadays, you have streaming services and let's say legally gray websites that allow you to watch any show or movie if you really try. But before all of that, the only way you could fact check insane claims you'd see out there was to actually try and watch everything yourself, which just was not nearly as practical or easy as it is today. So thank you again to the Iron Bible. I'm going to link to that down below if you want to check out the many articles they have here about the history of Zoids. This has been a lot of words to really dive in deep to an anime that was, in reality, a really well done toy commercial. Which really worked too, even though it was a bit delayed to get to that. Still worked. Recently, I went to SakuraCon here in Seattle, and it took a lot for me to resist buying more. I've become a little model kit addicted over the course of writing this video, so please help me out for that one. It's gonna be a problem. Now again, they definitely did a lot to introduce new Zoids in an effort to sell more kits to kids, but if you're pairing that with a good story, then who am I really to judge? Like, you can buy the kits if you want, you don't have to, you still get a good story no matter what.
Xebec, the animation studio, was able to really showcase some great animation here too. I really can't stress enough how revolutionary CG animation is in this anime. Eiji Inamoto's presence in that, coming from a video game animation freelancer into anime, is one factor, to be sure, but the director, Takao Kato, taking the series in that direction and having faith in the technology to actually utilize it effectively in a TV anime is very impressive. Honestly, without CG, I don't know how you could even make an anime like Zoids. Sure, there's plenty of hand-drawn mecha anime pre-Zoids, but this has the added complexity of all the mechas being different animals. While Gundam or Escaflowne or countless other hand-drawn mecha anime are undoubtedly complex, these human-like mechs still, for the most part, move like a person would. Animating animals, though, is a different layer of complexity with bodies that naturally do not move like a person's would at all. This is partly why Beastars, one of Studio Orange's biggest hits, could have only been done with CG even to this day. Possible to do it hand-drawn, but the level of skill and time needed to do that is far greater. It just wouldn't be practical on a TV budget. And on top of that, mechanized animals? Naturally, you would have to turn to CG animation, which had seen sporadic usage in anime for over 10 years at that point. CG was becoming more and more prominent. For example, the year before Zoids was the debut of the classic Initial D and its usage of CG cars to adapt the series' signature drifting. Comparing the animation between the two, though, is pretty night and day. While it also gets the job done, Initial D's CG still looks incredibly rough. But hey, we can even compare Zoids to Zoids itself. While both Zoids Chaotic Century and Zoids New Century were handled by Xebec, in 2004 there was Zoids Fusers by Tokyo Kids, which has a noticeable downgrade when it comes to the Zoids shading especially. While the movement generally looks okay, the models themselves feel stark against the 2D characters. In the 2005 Zoids Genesis, it's significantly worse, with models that do not blend into the world at all, and movements that feel janky and just a bit off. Looking at Genesis and Chaotic Century side by side, it's clear that even with 6 years in between both series originally airing, Chaotic Century still holds up in a way that Genesis just doesn't. Also, to give everyone a reminder of the type of CG you saw on TV at this time, Xebec in 2001 put out an anime called Cubics. And like, just look at this shit, this is full-on CG anime. It's really undoubtedly the biggest disaster of 2001, and low-key, I also resented this show as a kid because it was the first time I saw a character named Connor, and I just did not like it one bit. Compare this to Trigun Stampede, and it's really crazy how far CG anime has really come. Another cool thing AG did was lower down the frame rate as much as he could in many scenes. While it's reported that the higher-ups strived for smoothness, he found that being flexible with the amount of frames you allow in CG animation can make it feel less jarring, especially combined with traditional animation. This is especially the case in anime since it heavily relies on limited animation or animation with very limited frames to keep down costs. When speaking about how he uses this principle even today with Orange, he stated,
"Oversimply stating things a bit, I think that our works have a little less frames than average. It can be very subjective though, and the way of doing things through CG may not necessarily be correct. For instance, when we use 3 frames per second, some people might say that looks good, while others wouldn't. One of the effects is that it can come out looking gentle. When we want a harder look, we increase the frames. The number of frames is something we think about in relation to movement, which is our bigger focus. In that sense, frame modulations is a means to an objective. For example, we aren't going for the cartoony movements you'd get from, say, a Pixar or Disney film, but their movements are also very gentle, so we referenced it a little bit when it comes to the movements in our works. so it may be the case that in brief moments that gentleness gets brought out. Other companies tend to go with full frame CG or anime on 2s, so our way of approaching the use of frames may be a little different. It's not set in stone how many frames we use, and we change things up when necessary.
As an aside, it's crazy how often people cannot grasp the fact that more frames does not mean better. While in limited situations and contexts it can add a lot to a sequence, see the love of Sakuga in the anime community, a scene does not immediately benefit from having its framing rate pumped up. In fact, this can end up just being distracting and making the sequence not land properly. That's what AG is trying to communicate here.
That's not even mentioning the 60 frames per second anime perverts who will use programs to try to make an anime 60 frames per second in an effort to make it look smoother, when in reality all this does is ruin the intentionality of the animator's timing. Like if you took any sequence out of the second season of Jujutsu Kaisen and smoothed it out, then it may look different, but the punches, the kicks, the curse techniques, they're all gonna lose their impact because their timing has been severely disrupted. You've completely ruined all the intentionality. In my Spider-Verse video, I touched upon this a bit, how in that movie, the animators intentionally animated Miles on 2s and the other Spider people on 1s, meaning that Miles' poses held for 2 frames while everyone else's their poses would change from frame to frame. This intentional choice communicates to you, the viewer, subconsciously that Miles is inexperienced and can't move as fast or as fluid as his experienced spider friends. The amount of frames you use and why you use that many frames is a part of how animation tells its stories, and Eiji says that there's not a correct way to do it, it'll all be very situational. You can see this used effectively now in a lot of Orange's anime, especially Beastars. This makes it still feel tonally like a traditionally animated anime, even though CG animation has a lot more flexibility to easily look smoother than traditional animation, without ballooning up the budget. But that feels robotic and soulless, which is the subconscious problem that so many people have with CG anime. For a great video on this topic, I'm going to be linking a Doodly video called Why is Choppy Animation Better down below. So check that out if you want a deeper dive into this topic. This intentionality is also why AI animation is never going to replace people, because an AI is not a person and can never understand how we feel movements or how animators use tricks to bring out a feeling that you and I probably can't describe, because that's the essence of art. Animation isn't real movement. It is a interpretation of movement, an interpretation of the world around us, used in a way using art and drawings to feel more real than reality.
I wish there was more information on the actual behind the scenes for Chaotic Century, but sadly, there's not much available in terms of staff discussing how they manage this. Save for Eiji, who, as the founder of an active animation studio blazing the trail of CG animation, frequently talks about his own process and opinions on how to handle CG in anime. I've really enjoyed listening to him in interviews talk about his studio's work practices as well, paying his animators comparable to video game animators with more comparable working conditions. Now you may be thinking, are video game company working conditions good? And it's miles better than it is for 2D hand-drawn animators in the anime industry. So, a very interesting mind on the future of anime and the state of the industry. I highly recommend checking out some of his interviews because you can get some pretty interesting thoughts on stuff, and he sometimes mentions Zoids Chaotic Century since it was the beginning of his career.
Now you're never going to hear me say that CG anime should replace hand-drawn. No one's suggesting that. But with studios like Orange putting out bangers like Beastars or Trigun Stampede, or you have Toei Animation with their stunning recent foray into CG with Girls Band Cry, it's clear that CG anime is here to stay. You've seen a real revolution in the entire anime industry, especially in a post-Spider-Verse world. There is a demand for varied and stylistic CG animation, and more tools are becoming available to aid in fusing it with hand-drawn animation to really give projects a new flair to them. This, of course, didn't happen overnight. It's taken decades of dedication and trial and many errors, but these long cultivated trees have been bearing fruit. And one of the key stepping stones in that development was Zoids Chaotic Century. People may not remember this series, especially if they're under the age of 30, but Zoids Chaotic Century showed me the potential of this technology. Not in any way that I really would have recognized at the time, I was a child, but in the way that I not only tolerated the animation, but I loved it. I loved the action, the way that the Zoids would skid and dodge, the way that you could feel the weight in these larger, more powerful Zoids as they would lumber into battle against Van's nimble and more agile shield liger and Irvine's speedy command wolf. It pulled all of that off while presenting a visually interesting world with characters that grew and developed as they became further entangled in war and politics. This is one of those shows that, while not the most complex, it didn't give you just some villain of the week. There was progression, setups, payoffs. It felt rewarding to delve into this world with Van and Fiona. I'm not going to pretend this is some lost masterpiece, but there's a reason I took months out of my life to make this video on this particular anime. Underrated doesn't even begin to describe this anime to me. From a technical standpoint, from its story, its character designs, it deserves its flowers. Hopefully after all of this, you're tempted to give it a shot. The English dub is a little silly, but I think that just adds to the charm. So check it out, see what you think, and maybe you'll be tempted to start building your own model kits as well. I know I am. I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for more. Hopefully I can find a shield liger myself. Though I also have a problem, so maybe I'm not the best person to listen to. Maybe don't take my advice. And maybe all of this was a mistake. Maybe this entire video was a waste of time, but hey, you watched it, and I want to thank you very much for watching all this video. This took a long time to make, and while I do plan to make long videos like this in the future, you can subscribe and see some of my shorter videos on more recent anime. I want to thank you again for watching this video. This has meant a lot to me. This whole video has been a giant process. Filming it has been miserable because it's so hot out, but I want to thank you, and I hope you have a great day, a great night, or whatever it is you're having. And stay rad.